Everybody, welcome to our webinar, Moving On from Facilities Management to Workplace Management, based on themes from Dr Jervis's latest book. The webinar today is hosted by AWA. We've been helping large organisations make the transition to more modern ways of working for 20 years now. My name's Will Corliss. I'm going to be presenting you the webinar today. Just to mention quickly, if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, you have an option to put your hand up on the GoToWebinar tab, so feel free to do that, or alternatively, if you add to the chat bar your difficulty, we'll try and sort it out for you. I'll pass you over to your speakers shortly. Like I said, today's webinar is based on themes from Dr Jervis's latest book, which is hence called Moving On FM to Workplace Management. Graham's a founding director of AWA, and today he's going to be discussing some of the thinking behind his book with one Mr. Andrew Mawson. Andy is the managing director of AWA. Together they're going to look into Graham's workplace management excellence model that he's developed over his 20 years of experience in the industry with some of Europe's leading companies. We're going to carry out a couple of Q&As throughout the webinar as well at different points, so please feel free to put your questions in the question tab that you should see on your GoToWebinar screen. Firstly though, just to get everything kicking off, we're going to just do a quick poll, if you wouldn't mind. We have two questions for you. You should see the first of which on the screen in just a moment. There we go. So which of the following do you think the business will value most from FM right now? That's currently. And the answers can be continual cost reduction, responsiveness to change, innovation, improvements to service quality, and better alignment to business strategies. So I'll just give everyone a sec to do that. I think we're just about there. You should see the results on your screen shortly. There you go. So as we can see, the 43% of you have chosen continual cost reductions, which is interesting. We'll look at that again in just a moment. I'm going to ask you the second poll now, which you should see crop up. This one's about the future, so this is more looking in the long term. So which of the following do you think the business will value most from FM in the long term? The answers are the same, and I'll just give you another moment to do that for us. There we go. Everyone's results are in. They should pop up now. Okay, there you go. So in the long term, we can see that the votes are very different. 43% of you have gone with better alignment to business strategies. Okay, so we'll look at that, like I said, a little bit more in just a moment. So really, without any further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Andrew and Graham to introduce themselves to you.
Okay,
Andy,
hi everybody. Hi everybody. Andrew Mawson here. So very interesting poll response, which I think reflects very much the way I think we're beginning to see the world, and I think reflects quite a substantial shift from the operational world of FM as we see it to something a little bit more aspirational as we move forward. So of course the question is, what is it that's going to make that shift and help us to make that shift? And I hope today we might agree between us that there is a model that we may align to, which might help us to make that shift. Yeah, so the issue I think is a lot of people think facilities management and workplace management are one and the same thing, and I think we kind of beg to differ really. So over to you, Graham. So workplace management and facilities management, they're one and the same thing, true or false?
Sort of true and false, really. One includes the other. But let's, first of all, we're going to spend a little while on workplace management. Let's just remind ourselves what facilities management is perceived to be, really, rather than how we would maybe view it ourselves. For a lot of people, it's really about looking after the built environment. It's about providing buildings and plants that operate smoothly, that are maintained and are kept clean. And generally, they also look at facilities management people in a sort of stereotypes. So if we go to the next one, Will. You know, they see facilities people as being helpful, they sort out problems, they're basically technical, they are engineering, they're not seen as being quite the same as associated with the alignment with the business. And furthermore, they see them really as quite a lot of cost. So if we go to the next slide, Will. And the approach that most businesses take to inherent costs, which isn't directly related to generating the business, is to look at ways in which they can force it down. And the approach generally then is to squeeze costs. And if we look at, we all know what squeezing costs do. The sponge can only take so much water, it can't continue to be removed. And that's not a particularly useful business strategy in the long term, which I think really is recognised by the poll results. So let's now just look at what workplace management is and the way we see it. We see it as really being a shift from focus primarily on buildings and plant to focusing upon people and supporting them in doing their best work, wherever that might be. And it's about really designing effective but economic workplace experiences, experiences that support people doing the work and not experiences that cause them hassle. And really this sort of area of workplace experience is one which is I think new to a lot of facilities management people, and I would like to sort of invite Andy to sort of take us through some of the thinking that he's had over the years on this. Andy?
Yes, thanks, Graham. Well, if you could just flip to the next slide, please. So for me, the experience is about the coming together of a variety of senses that we all have every day. So the human brain is constantly picking up data about the world through the 5 senses, and these come together to form perceptions. And of course, we all draw conclusions about organizations and the way that they feel about us from those perceptions. So I think the, moving to the next slide, please, Will. The issue, I think, for many is that the workplace experience, it starts very early in the morning for some people. We sense the workplace through our IT. The IT is becoming a bigger part of our sensory experience, I think. And then moving on through time, when we arrive at the building, from the external facade, we draw some conclusions about the organization through the reception. Through every part of our journey and our experience, we're picking up messages about how the organization wants us to feel about the way we relate to it. And the issue for me is that whole process is really not designed today. We have a variety of different service providers doing their best in their own little way, but actually there's no linkage. So for me, the experience works on 2 levels. One is at a practical level, giving people the opportunity to work in the best way that they can, do their best work every day. And the other one is in terms of the messages and the senses and the experience that they actually have. So that's kind of my definition, if you like, of workplace experience, Graham.
Yeah, okay. Well, this slide really shows something about concern I have about it. It sounds really quite an expensive exercise if you've got to try and define people's experiences. In the current climate, how do you actually see that as a balance between cost effectiveness and experience?
Well, I think that, your slide showing the wringing out of the sponge is a classic, because I think what most organisations are trying to do is just chop away at the costs, and maybe a little bit here on cleaning, a little bit there on catering. I think what I'm saying is that to get the most out of the investment in real estate facilities, what we need to be doing is delivering economic experiences and economic effectiveness and workplace experiences that are effective. And by that I mean, if you look at economic effectiveness, still today most buildings are underused, most workplaces, most desks are underutilized. So there are opportunities to make that work harder by approaching it from a mobile and agility sort of style, even within the office. But then also, very few organizations in my experience have actually focused in any kind of sophisticated way on designing and then trying to deliver robust experiences. And for me, workplace management is about doing these 2 things at the same time to get the client the best bang for their buck out of their investment in their workplaces. And that's the way I see it anyway.
So you see it as a reinvestment of some of the savings into improving the experience?
Yeah, indeed.
Okay.
So, but I do recognise, moving to the next slide, Will, I do recognise that the world is changing, and you know, people are working in different places. So workplace management has to embrace working in a variety of different places, but it also has to recognise that the world is changing. Businesses are changing, organisations are changing, markets are changing. We've got faster and faster life cycles in our businesses, and so the services that we create, we put in place to deliver these experiences, need to be designed robustly in such a way that they can and they will change in line with what the business requires.
Okay.
Moving on, Will.
Well, let me just summarise then where we see workplace management. I mean, it's a shift really from engineering through to experiences. So we talked about experiences. They've got to be good experiences wherever people work, and that can be in many different ways and different places now. It's a bringing together of technology, it's bringing together working practices, policies and space. And to me it is it's about preempting the change. It's looking forward to the future and taking that view to influence the business through being a lot more business professional in the way we move things forward.
So business, you know, you've got customers, you've got clients, you've got resources, you've got efficiency. So it's really like running a service business within a service business, really, isn't it, for many organisations?
Yes, it is really. It means really we've got to create a common language between the business and the workplace management. We've got to be able to do that by being able to demonstrate adding value rather than just consuming cost. And that means we've got to build in really quite robust management capabilities. And it just appeared to me that really what we need is a management excellence model to support the creation and development of those business management capabilities.
Okay, so that's I think that's a pretty good summary of what we think workplace management is. I mean, there is an alignment to the business element to this as well, isn't there, which is quite important, Graham?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that the poll right at the very beginning said in the long term, and by that I presume people mean about 3 or 4 years, you know, that the main interest is one of alignment with business strategies. It's gratifying to see that so many people also agree.
Well, I think what's interesting though, Graham, is you know, I know that people have described that shift, but it's interesting to me to ask the question, maybe it'll come up in the Q&A, what is it that's actually going to cause that shift to happen? Because that means a lot of people are going to start looking at the facilities world in a very different way, really. So talking of questions, we want to move on, Will. I think now would be a pretty good time to take some questions. Can you let us have the first set? Anybody got any questions that they haven't put forward? If they'd like to now, this would be a good place to do it. So, Will, what have we got?
Yeah, we've got plenty actually, Andrew. Thanks for that. We'll start off with one from Robert. I suppose you just sort of covered it. He was saying, do we have the luxury of looking forward? We're usually scrambling to fix the problems of today.
Yeah, well, it's a good question actually, because really I recognise that a lot of people are in difficulty in actually meeting the demands of the business as it currently stands, particularly if they're being squeezed on resources. But at the end of the day, one has to create enough space for one to be able to think for the future and be able to persuade people about the need to move on. It'd be very interesting to know just how CEOs would actually answer the questions of the poll as well. But really, it's about gathering together some people that will mentor your ideas, putting forward a good business case, and gathering the support of other infrastructure service providers.
I think the danger is, I mean, I think the FM world has been in this this kind of loop for a little while. You know, if people don't break out of that operational sort of focused area and don't start to present themselves in a slightly different way, then you can be sure that this is the way that the world will be, and we'll be sitting here in 10 years' time and we'll have the same issues in terms of the influence of facilities and real estate people as we currently have. What's your next question, Rob?
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for that. I hope that answers that for you, Robert. If it doesn't, feel free to pop a question in the question box on the right-hand side. I've got another one for you, gents, coming from Eric. I'm an operational facilities manager. What can I do to get to a position of influence?
Right, do you want to try that one, Andy?
Well, I think there are a number of things that, yeah, I think so. I think there are a number of things that you can do. I mean, the first one is to learn a lot about the whole discipline of workplace management. And I guess I would say this, but buying Graham's book would be a good place to start with that. But then I think there's a business about presenting yourself in a different way, presenting yourself as a business specialist, knowing and taking time to go and find out what's really happening in the business, what really makes it tick, what's happening in its external marketplace, and begin conversations which are not about technical excellence, but they're actually more about what's going on in the business. And then the alignment to the facilities function to the business will then kind of evolve from that, it seems to me. I don't know whether you agree with that, Graham.
Well, I think networking is an important issue here, really. If you can build up sort of social and non-sort of business relationships with people that are in the business and experiencing some of the issues that they face, you begin to learn about what their concerns are for the future, and start to address some of those concerns in some of your own thinking. It's not a quick process. It's one of education on both sides, I believe.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thanks for that. Hope that's okay for you, Eric. Yeah, we have a question coming from Sasha. She's asking, have you asked the same poll questions to senior management? How do they think FM will add value in the future?
No, we haven't actually, but that's what I was alluding to a moment ago, really. I think it'd be quite interesting to actually do that and see just how much agreement you would get.
Well, I think that brings us on to an interesting point, Sasha, because it seems to me that all of those parties, all those professional bodies who have an interest in the FM and real estate area really should be getting together to promote this whole area of workplace management. Because I think at the moment, chief executives have a very sort of operational view of facilities people, and there is a little bit of a battle for turf here. I mean, we've got the IT guys whose world is changing quite quickly, who have a need to find things, will have a need to find things to do in the future. We've got the HR functions which are similarly looking to try to develop their capability in-house, and they're actually often quite well positioned. And I think what we've got to try and do is to shift the real estate facilities world into a perception from leaders which is much more about alignment with business and many of the things we've talked about so far. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I hope that helps. Thanks for that. Paul is asking, what is being measured? FM will show its impact on the business when FM can measure its impact, but who is doing it and how?
Well, that's a good question, and I think one of the problems we have, and it sort of goes back to the original poll, is that pretty well the only thing that people are getting measured on, well, within reason, is cost. That's the thing that's where the dominant focus is, and without an alternative balancing measurement, which is more around people productivity, satisfaction, human effectiveness, it seems to me that we'll continue to push very hard just on the things that we actually do measure.
I think, if I put my 2 pence in here, I think at the end of the day it comes back to, again, the language of business. And the language of business is inevitably going to be focused towards finance. And I think we've got to be more innovative about how we actually present our costs in terms of the benefit. So, for example, if we were to look at where we spend our costs, the ratio of fixed costs versus flexible costs, if the organisation is interested in flexibility, then clearly having very high fixed costs is not a good thing. You can measure progress towards flexibility in a financial sense. It's thinking along those terms, I think, which we need to do a lot more.
Okay. So shall we now talk about the workplace excellence model? Some great questions there from everybody. Now the workplace excellence model, Graham, is a tool that we've developed which enables you really to, it's a structure, management structure if you like, for managing the workplace management activity. So do you want to just talk through the different aspects of this, Graham?
Yeah, well, let's just take the high-level view at the moment. Essentially, there are 4 levels. And if we start, first of all, with the strategic management level, this is primarily concerned with building up those relationships between all the various stakeholders. That's from the executive as well as the suppliers, and working through a future view as to how those services are going to support the business.
Okay.
So it is about really the creation of strategic management plans for the future.
Okay. And the second level, Graham?
Well, the second level is really in the day-to-day enactment of that through the business units. And the client relationship management owns that relationship on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. And the third?
Well, again, at the highest level, what we're talking about here is performance management that supports the top 2. So that's the creation of the management metrics that determine how the services are provided, their ongoing performance on a day-to-day basis, but also is responsible for developing up the key performance indicators which are aligned to what the business KPIs are. Okay,
so the fourth level is much more about the delivery of services, I guess.
Well, it's more operational in its sense. It's not all these apply to all services, but they are more associated with the enactment of how they're done on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, so now this is a model that we've used many times with a number of very large organisations over the years. But it maybe just to go back over what we discussed about workplace management in the early stages, just to pick up a couple of things. So strategic management, that's the place where we would go about designing our experience and developing the mechanisms and tools for managing it, I guess.
Yeah, that's where you could do that. You also create the appropriate policies. It's responsible for developing up the capabilities of workplace management within the organisation, and it's dependent upon really creating very good financial languages, if you like, which they can talk to the business about. So it's about the right sort of financial accounting management that is needed to support it.
So client relationship management is very much about treating the leaders and the more operational folk in the business as real customers, I guess, and managing that experience they have on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I would also characterise it as a bit of an internal consultancy business as well. They act as change agents. They're the ones that sort of sell and enthuse the business units in terms of the changes that are going to take place in order to meet the future visions and views of the organisation.
Okay, and performance management, you'd assume, relies on a fairly heavyweight IT infrastructure, information management infrastructure.
Well, it certainly requires a lot of data management, that's for sure. But it's also, if you like, means by which you get collaboration and agreement on what should be measured and what performance standards should be reached.
Okay.
It's also here that where quality improvement takes place as well, so it's a learning activity.
So capacity management and resource management on the bottom layer, many of those things at the bottom I think are probably well understood, but capacity management and resource management,
well, they're fairly closely related. I call them the twin brothers, really. Capacity, though, is about understanding the constraints that exist within either the physical assets or within the services that are provided. Without understanding how much you can stretch those, then you have some difficulty in getting proper utilization. Resource management, on the other hand, is about how the resources are being used. It would include, for example, energy management. It would also include utilization of desks and space and meeting rooms and things like that.
Okay, so capacity management very much about supply, resource management very much about demand in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a good way of thinking about it.
Okay, now so that's a good framework. It's pretty robust. It covers most of the aspects that we're talking about. How can we go about using that framework to help us improve then, Graham?
Well, it's all very well having a book which tells you all the sort of best practices you might want to consider, but it doesn't tell you exactly where you are at the moment. You don't have a sort of means of comparison of which takes you from where you are now to where you want to be, or even allow you to compare with one organisation and another organisation.
Okay. So do you want to
we needed a tool. We needed a tool to develop.
Tell us about the tool. Tell us about the tool.
Okay. Right. Next slide, please. It's a computer system which we've devised, which has a screen for each of the capabilities. So if you move on, please, to the first slide. Okay, this is a screenshot from the model. It's a screenshot from the capability that deals with strategy and management. And what we've got here is a series of statements or questions which all relate to best practices. And there is a drop-down choice of responses to those questions, which range from yes, we do things, or no, we don't do things, or we do things partially, or we're planning to do things, whatever is appropriate to the particular best practice. And depending upon that answer, there is an automatic scoring system to stop you to systemize the way in which it's all scored. You can override it so that if you don't use a particular best practice, but you achieve the same end in a different way, you can put your own comments in there and you overwrite the automatic scoring. But the whole idea of this is to systemize the scoring so that you've got a consistent sort of benchmarking approach to the best practices that you're adopting. And with the next slide, we've got an example really from lower down in the model of supply chain management on selection of contractors. And the same thing happens here. Again, you've got the opportunity of choosing from the drop-down menu against questions or best practices that are covered.
Okay, so there are 10 of these screens, aren't there, Graham?
Yeah, there's 10 of those, yes.
Yeah, and they all map to the original model that we just talked through. Now, and I'm assuming that there's a score for each one of these. How do those scores get presented then? Right,
well, if Will shifts me on to the next slide, please. What I have here is a spider diagram, which is very top level, and it shows the relative average scores for the questions that have been raised in each of the 10 areas. So we see here, the strengths and weaknesses fairly quickly of the entire picture, if you like.
Okay, so problem management for this organisation is a strength, as is probably risk management and possibly client relationship management. But if you looked at capacity management and resource management, maybe those are not so good. So maybe those are areas that we might have to do some.
Yeah, project management doesn't look too good either. I think overall the other point you would make is that it's reasonably balanced overall, but not excelling in any particular area at all. Now that may be appropriate for this organisation, or it may not be.
Okay. Now my organisation just happens to be particularly interested in supply chain management.
Yeah.
Because of the nature of the business that we're in, that's the way we want to put the emphasis. Is there any way that I could weight these so that I can see a picture in a different way?
Yes, before you begin to fill in the assessment, you are asked really to weight each of the 10 capabilities in a way that represents your interests. So, for example, if you had supply chain management, you wouldn't give it a 10% score along with everything else. You'd reduce one of the others and you'd give it an enhanced score. And what this slide shows is if taking those weightings and applying them to the gap between what you currently are performing at and where you would like to be.
So on this picture, then, you know, capacity management needs some attention. The project management does, and change management does, but some of the others are okay. So this is kind of showing the reverse picture of that we saw before.
Absolutely, it's drawing your attention straight away to where you need to consider prioritizing what you do.
Okay, so that's it's quite a neat way to show how you're doing. Can it be broken down to a level lower so that I can sort of share the burden of improvement with some of my colleagues on my leadership team, possibly?
Yes, well, each of those 10 areas, well, many of those 10 areas have subsections within them, and so you can look at them at that level, at that lower level. So you see here a much larger range of capabilities that are included within the 10 areas that we've talked primarily about, and each one of those can be compared in relative strengths, as we see here.
Okay, now obviously we've used this this tool and these models with a number of large clients over the years, but of course, and we have our own place in the world. But I mean, is this have you linked this to any reputable quality model or quality management system in any way?
Well, one of the things that really concerned me was this gap of understanding, the gap of language between business and the FM, as well as business and IT. And I suppose the same thing goes with HR. All seem to have problems in communicating their requirements. So what I did was to look around for a business excellence model which would be appropriate to sort of compare it against. And the EFQM excellence model has been around now for the best part of 20 years. It's used by about 500 companies over many countries.
So EFQM, Graham?
Oh, right, yeah. It stands for the European Foundation for Quality Management, although they've dropped the longer title and they just call themselves EFQM these days. And what I did was to take all the 300-odd best practices that are covered in the model and in the book, and each one of those are ascribed to one or more of these excellent model enablers and results. I did that with a senior EFQM assessor to help me, so I'm pretty confident we've got a good mapping.
So looking at the next slide, so this is the kind of picture that you get to show you how you do against the EFQM model, then, Greg.
Yeah, if your organisation is using EFQM speak, as it were, then this is the sort of way you would be looking at things, and it's taking things, the results directly from the model, using the mapping to map on and produce this performance presented in EFQM terms. And it also breaks it down into smaller segments as well.
Okay, so moving to the next slide, Will. So we've covered a good amount of ground there around workplace management. You can read much more about this in Graham's book. It's available for blurb.co.uk or blurb.com. And you can learn more about the work we do on workplace management if it's something that's of interest to you by just looking at our website, www.advancedworkplace.com. Now, maybe we can now take a few more questions. Maybe we can shift to the next slide, Will. But while we're just waiting for a couple of those to come in, let me just explain a little bit how we think the world can use these tools. Again, if you could shift on such, thank you. So clearly the model itself provides quite a rich framework for managing the workplace activities, and certainly I think if people were to be able to focus in and be very competent in each one of the 10 areas that we're covering, then that would be of value individually. But for teams, it's very useful to use the tool that Graham described as a means of benchmarking themselves against what we might consider best practice to look like, and to set out their own improvement programs. So that's certainly an area that we've been working with one client on. And then in today's world, as more organisations are outsourcing more of their FM activities, we've found that there are a number of clients who are interested in using the tool to assess the goodness or otherwise of the management capabilities out in the field in different territories, and in parallel with some financial measurements, particularly as compliance becomes a bigger issue, particularly for the banks. So those are kind of the three areas that we've seen. I suppose the fourth one is as a tool, that the industry can get behind, really. And I know Graham particularly has a strong desire to have the tool used, universally in a kind of an open system sort of way. So that's kind of what we have in our minds at the moment. If anybody's interested in getting involved in this workplace management thing in any way, then we'd be delighted to hear from you separately, and we'll give you Will's contact details shortly. So Will, can we have our first question, please?
You can indeed, Andy. This one's from Lee. He's saying, is the WM Excellence model based on in-house FM service, or can it be applied to an outsourced FM?
Okay, shall I answer that one?
Yeah, sure.
It makes no assumption whatsoever about where or how the services are provided. So in that sense, it should be used in all circumstances associated with the delivery of FM and workplace management services.
Okay, very good.
Okay, thank you, Graham.
For that question.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. We do have another one coming in from Mel. Do you see workplace managers sitting in the property function, or is this better aligned with other business functions?
Right, this is a good one. I think really I see the CRE FM being pretty well closely integrated in any sense, really. But I also see that there has to be a lot more close working relationship between HR and IT. And I think that is really probably where the greatest challenge rests.
I would say in the long term, I can see the evolution of an infrastructure management function, which embraces IT, facilities, and some aspects of HR. I mean, I think we're a way off that, but I mean, I think the way technology is moving, that's likely to be, it's going to be a fairly obvious thing to do, to evolve to it, but it will take a little bit of time, and of course it will mean that some power bases and silos will ultimately have to be melted down a little bit. So, next question, Will.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mel. This one's from Paul. The balanced scorecard is 20 years old. Why are execs still focused on cost when a balanced view has been shown to work better over the medium term?
I think it takes a long while for attitudes to change. I think we've got a whole generation of people who have been brought up from financial backgrounds, and it's going to take a while to get some of these things through. But I agree with you. Balanced scorecards is very much a technique that I think should be widely adopted.
I'd say balanced scorecards have been quite widely adopted in the manufacturing sector, where I think people have taken a slightly more broad view of the whole business about management. I think that there is a huge opportunity now to take these sorts of tools into the service sector, and particularly as you look at banks, there really isn't very much by way of a quality standard in banks around in any form, really. And I think it would be very powerful to have these sorts of tools in to counterbalance the real heavy weight that the city, the PLC status places on them, particularly because the drive is for improvements in cost performance and profit performance in the short term, and I think that ultimately destroys value to some degree.
Yeah, I would agree with that actually, because if you looked at the EFQM adoption, it's been very widely adopted by manufacturing industries rather than the financial communities.
Next question, Will?
Yeah, sure. Thanks again for the question. Do we think this tool could be used by CFOs or HR directors to assess their FM development?
For sure, I think is the answer. For sure, because I don't think there is any real mechanism by which senior leaders can determine the goodness or otherwise of their infrastructure management functions. And I think a lot of them, don't necessarily know what good looks like. So yes, I definitely think that's true. Would you agree, Graham?
Yeah, I would. There's quite a number of best practices that look around the collaboration between HR and IT in the delivery of services as well as the determining of strategies.
Okay. So that was a good question. So
Okay.
One last question, possibly?
Yeah, we've got one last question here from Kevin. If capacity and resource management are brothers, like it was mentioned earlier, wouldn't it be better to combine them rather than having them separately?
Well, you could combine them. I think it really doesn't matter too much, really, because as long as they appear, the best practices appear somewhere in the model and can be easily identified, then that's fine. The way I was thinking of it, though, is that if you look at resource management includes energy management, and that tends to be done towards the engineering disciplines, whereas space utilization will fall in space planning. So I was trying to actually get the things to be separated properly. But
Okay.
yeah, I think it's a matter of semantics.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Graham. Thank you everyone for your questions. We had loads of questions coming in, so if yours didn't get answered, we do apologise. We'll make sure we answer those for you after the webinar's finished. We'll get in contact through email or another medium. That just about wraps things up for today. We've been here about 44 minutes. Yeah, if anyone, like Andrew said earlier, if anyone has any interest in knowing anything more about the methodology, the topics we spoke about, or anything more about AWA and our services, there's a few details on your screen just now. Our website's advanced-workplace.com. And also, feel free to drop me an email, call us at advanced-workplace.com. It's on the screen as well. Yeah, if there's anything you want to know or just want to get in contact, don't hesitate to contact me. I think it's fair to say we'll be hosting some more webinars in the not-so-distant future. So it'd be great to have everyone join us again, really. So thank you very much for attending, everyone. I wish you all a very nice evening, and hopefully we'll speak to you again. Thank you very much for coming. Good night, everyone. Bye.